Hey everyone, welcome back to CryptoCache. Thank you so much again for joining me here. Hope you're having a phenomenal day. We've got a very important update today, more specifically a fundamental catalyst that's going to impact Bitcoin and altcoins. 12:20 p.m. Pacific, 12:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're going to go ahead and see Jerome Powell start speaking today. He's going to be covering rate cuts, economic data uncertainty, growth and inflation, labor market tariff impacts, and of course asset valuations. The primary thing, of course, here to me is if he's dovish or hawkish during the conversation today. That'll basically tell us what's going to happen moving forward with the market. So that's a pretty important one. So just be mindful of that. We're also going to take a quick look, of course, at some order block data, the double top on the weekly, but also some slight divergences here on the 3-day time frame. And then, of course, the CME gaps effectively getting majority filled. So that's a very positive sign in a lot of ways. And also a money flowing into stablecoin here, what that means for us. So be sure to stick around. We got a super important one here today. Let's take a closer look. All right, folks, before we jump into the back-end data, I want to say thank you again so much for just being a phenomenal part of my life. It's great to be able to experience this with you day in and day out, even though the markets can be kind of crazy. The lack of craziness with our community is pretty awesome. So everyone comes together doing really well. And just quick congrats to our community here. Nice profits yesterday from our SUI long, good 31% there in a couple of hours. It was a good little quick in and out there. We are slightly in the red on our XRP long, but I still feel like we're in pretty good shape. And I'll explain more so why I feel that here too. Now, when we look at the back-end data, before we do that, I do want to describe one thing here or quickly clarify what your thoughts are here, just based on the last 20 minutes worth of voting. We can see approximately 47 votes, about 60% of you think we're going to go higher here on crypto Twitter. And we look at crypto YouTube, we can recognize here that if we go to our post section, that they are thinking roughly the same. Majority of folks are fairly well bullish on Bitcoin, pumping here after Jerome Powell speaks. So we're going to talk about why that might be the case, but let's go ahead and dive into the back-end data here and just recognize 113,000 is that local resistance and 112.6 is that local support. This is not an exact level here, folks. This constantly changes. In fact, this won't even be a factor by the time you watch this video. But the reason why I like to touch on this is because it's important to understand order blocks if they're concentrated really close to the price or away from the price. And generally, that shows weakness or strength. Now, when we look here at double top, this is potential double top, of course, but we're not quite there yet. I think in order for the double top to happen, we need to close somewhere underneath 109,000 as a close approximate. So while I want to just bring this to your attention that this is a possibility, the probability of it is still fairly low considering we're still above most moving averages. And every time the price pulls back to this 110 to 112K range, there's a lot of buying pressure. So we're generally in good shape here. One more thing too that is slightly bearish is on the 3-day time frame. We can see we have basically a second MACD divergence here on the 3-day time frame, kind of letting us know that we may actually be picking up momentum to the downside. Now, that's not exactly true because we are establishing higher lows. So generally speaking, when you are establishing higher lows into a divergence, it's a very inconsistent indication, right? So try not to put too many eggs in one basket, i.e., don't trust the moving averages too much when it comes to the MACD divergence or convergence. It's a good indication, but there's got to be other complementing factors present, and there aren't any right now on the macro structure. So I'm just not bearish at all in this case. Now, am I mega bullish? No, I'm not either, too, because we got to be realistic and just presume that the price action for Bitcoin will probably be pretty funky for a while because big money's involved. And until all these fundamental things stop happening, there's a great chance we're just going to be stuck on stupid. Anyways, all that being said, on the far right, Solana is the CME futures here. We can see that's majority filled. You can pretty much just presume that's fully filled. Same thing with ETH and Bitcoin too. So the great news about this situation here is that the CME gaps are majority filled. Okay, like 80 to 90% of them have been fully filled. So that's a good sign, basically implying profits have been taken from this past weekend and or 2 or 3 weekends ago for Bitcoin. So those are ultimately great signs. And that, to me, leads me to believe that we're starting to bottom out and we should progress higher. Okay, so that's just kind of the concept there. Now, when we look at Bitcoin dominance on the top left, we're seeing a doji candle there. which is followed, of course, by an FU candle from a couple of days ago. But if we look at the daily time frame here, we can recognize that this is just kind of one of those structures that's important to understand, that we are starting to kind of plateau and or pull back on Bitcoin dominance. So that's a good sign when it comes to the total market cap, right? We can see the price action kind of recovering here for us. And if we look on the top right, we go to the daily time frame too, we can see stablecoin dominance is starting to plateau as well. So generally speaking, when you see stablecoin plateauing and Bitcoin dominance starting to pull back, that generally gives rise to altcoins. Okay, so we're going to look at our altcoin season index and see if there's any increase in market cap, and that could reflect positivity in the overall sense. Now, we take a look here at the Bitcoin liquidation map. The one-day time frame tells us here in the last 24 hours that there's more liquidation on the upside than the downside. Obviously, that's because majority of longs got hit pretty hard here in the last 12 hours. It was a significant sell-off. In fact, it's pretty algorithmic selling. You can kind of see by the charts how perfect the descending trend is. And generally speaking, that's just commonplace, unfortunately, in the market right now. Just all those profits being taken from the weekend effectively. All that being said, the 7-day time frame doesn't tell us too much except for the fact that there's a significant pocket at 116. We can see that on liquidation maps pretty easy. We saw the double top at 116,000 recently, and that's just a fairly indicative sign here that that's the local resistance range for us. I mentioned 116 to 117 yesterday being a potential reality for us there, and since 117 wasn't hit, we got that 116 resistance wall. All that said, though, 7-day time frame, there's a pretty big spread. 1095 is the lowest area there for liquidation. We look at the 30-day time frame, we can understand here too that there's more liquidation locally. 113,000 is probably going to be hit here soon, but once that's fully swept, it could honestly go either way. So it's just really difficult to gauge where we're at in that sense, but if we look at the last 24 hours, you can kind of see once more, 114,000 is probably a better case scenario for this local push to the upside. We'll probably start to see some slowing pressure if that happens. Now, when we look at the last 24 hours of liquidation, we're going to see an imbalance here, which is standard for that type of algorithmic trading. In other words, when the price just continues to precipitate down with no correction, it's just bots just executing consistent sell orders until they hit their desired target, which to me feels like it's a $110,000 support range based on the CME gap getting majority filled. So are we going to pivot and bounce from here? The probability is higher, pending we don't have any kind of crazy crazy sentiment from Jerome Powell today, right? All that being said, we can see about a 3 to 4 to 1 ratio for Bitcoin for longs versus shorts, and a little less for ETH, even though ETH moved back pretty strong. That $4,000 support range is tentatively holding, and we'll talk more about that soon. All altcoin others, we can see about almost a 5 to 1 ratio there for those coins there. So a lot of coins got hit pretty hard. Truth is, this doesn't tell us too much about like the difference between coins, but what does tell us a lot is that there's money flowing away from ETFs, and that's generally unfavorable. Keep in mind that is based on the 12th. This is Sunday's data, not today's data, but with money flowing away from those coins, it's pretty obvious that we're on our way down, right? We're still in a bearish type of situation, so we don't want to think that we have broken bullish per se. I think we still got to be very careful in how we trade, but generally speaking, those aren't super awesome signs to see ETF net outflows. Now when we look here, speaking of outflow, we're at 1.58 trillion for altcoin market cap. That's generally a good sign. I don't really think that's a bad thing, honestly. The fact that we recovered so well is pretty good, but the truth is the sentiment on altcoins isn't very great. Altcoins pulled back 2 to 3x of Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin experienced a 2.5% correction, where most alts I saw 7 to 10%. So that's not a good pairing, okay? And oftentimes when you see that indifference, it's not really good conditions to want to take a long. Now, of course, everything, what goes up must come down. We may be in a position right now where, we have bottomed out, but it's best to maybe presume we could continue lower. We do also have a cup and handle pattern here forming for Bitcoin. So we do break this neckline here and retest bearishly 110,000. Further downside could be expected. We'll talk more about that later, more so just keep an eye on it for now. Let's see if there's anything else in the back end here that's kind of telling us anything. We're still in a fearish market, so that's kind of generally guidelines to want to consider buying, just as a common rule of thumb. But when we look at the price action, we're pretty far away from local liquidation, so nothing super telling there. The margin for top traders is decreasing, so we're seeing less activity as the price pulls back. And we can also recognize that too here with our $100,000 to $1 million position sizing. As that tapers off, we see more more weakness. And of course, true retail traders are very high right now. The delta here is super high. Basically, people like you and I are buying these dips, right? The chum in the waters, the food for the whales. All right, so all that said, on the far right-hand side, I got the 7 days pulled up here for our time frames on the heat maps. So we can recognize in the last 7 days, open interest areas are above the price. That works as a magnet. We're probably a lot more likely to see those prices retested soon. But the truth is, initial resistances at 112.5, 113.5, and 115.5. I'm rounding up and down in that case just to give you simple, easy round numbers. So every $1,000 roughly for Bitcoin, we're seeing some resistance. And we look at the overall liquidation delta, still at 30 billion, increasing from the 15 billion from before. So it basically doubled in selling pressure. And here's that 116,000. You can see that area of liquidation above the price that's still left remaining. Now there's a small amount below the price, but in the last 7 days, pretty much everyone's gotten flushed out. So we had a super mega rinse on Friday. Every potential long position got destroyed. And then late longs FOMO'd in on Sunday night, and they just got hammered again here late last night. So not great stuff, but that's generally the market that we're in. All right, so let's take a look at the daily time frame and kind of see where we're at. And just understand here once more, this resistance range of 115.5 to 117.5, that area of control for volume, held like a champ. Resistance range, perfect timing there. In fact, if I was awake at 9 p.m. last night, I probably would have shorted that $116,000 range. But as per usual, most of the big moves, typically, i.e. Asian markets, they tend to move faster when I'm sleeping. And that's just kind of the way that it goes. So unfortunately, if you live in the US, you can miss out a lot of opportunities. But if you're a night owl, maybe not, right? But got a little one, not really the case. Anyways, what I'm trying to get at here is that our volume, 116 to 118, that approximate range there, or 115.5 to 117.5, that's going to be presumed as a new resistance for us. Or it already has worked as a resistance, but just remember that number and understand that breaking through that range, we're going to need a lot more volume than what we saw yesterday. All that said, we can see some divergences here, of course, minus stochastic, a little bit of a swing there, which doesn't mean too much. I generally try to, pay attention to the second swing. The RSI is under 50, money flow index is over above the price. While that's generally favorable, that factors in still the last 14 candles. So it's not really a good indicator. The 4-hour time frame will give us probably a better indication of where we're at for the money flow index, which with it being high here is still generally positive. So I'm not super upset with that, but I can see here that the MACD is trying to diverge, but hasn't yet. There's a lot of little things here kind of letting us know that we're moderately bullish still. In other words, we're not in bad shape here, but we got to respect the fact that we're retesting this lower ascending trend pretty consistent. I mean, what we saw, 108, 109, 110, and now roughly 110 again. So all those things combined gives me some hope that we're probably going to bounce here, but we do have to be honest, open and honest with ourselves here, and just recognize that this inverse, cup and handle pattern, the more you test a support level, the more likely it is to break. Okay, and we've had almost 3 attempts in the last 3 weeks to break that 110K range. So we will see here soon. Hopefully, God willing, Jerome Powell is nice to us today. We'll see what happens. Comment below, let me know what your thoughts are there, or perhaps comment now and let me know what happened after the fact, because I'm sure Jerome Powell will speak by the time you've watched this. And if that is the case, interesting to see what's going to happen. All right, folks, go and take a quick look here at Ethereum, see what's going on here on the back end, just double check a few important things. We're going to focus more so on the last 7 days worth of open interest and liquidation, just kind of getting perspective a little bit more so on the local ranges there, because majority macro has been fully swept, and we kind of already know that. So taking a look here, 4,100 as per usual is that area there. For resistance, we also want to note too, 4,300 was that previous area, just so you understand kind of some area of confluence for this coin. 4,300 will continue to be that resistance level until we break it. We can see 4,300 was almost tested here locally, but secondary to that, we got like 3,970, round number 4,000. So easy numbers to remember for ETH, 3,900, 4,000, 4,100, and then 4,300. So pretty much every $100 for this coin. And we can see here with liquidation delta, it has shifted basically break even. So we're seeing that from that bullish momentum has dissipated. We're now at break even. And if we look at the last 7 days of liquidation, we'll be able to identify too the likelihood of more liquidation to the upside, Let's double check. Okay, actually, not really a whole heck of a lot. I mean, there's obviously some between 4,300 and 4,500, but nothing here close by. So that's kind of normal and par for the course when you have this rinse and repeat of just high price, low price, high price, low price. The whales are starting to, squeeze the price a little bit tighter and working within these ranges. So let's double check some important things here on the daily time frame and just kind of understand. Because when we look at this yesterday, we had a descending broadening wedge, which we still do have that pattern. And we take a look here. We never crossed 50 in the RSI. Stochastic swinging up, money flow index is lower. So these are all kind of early signs of weakness. I don't really like to take longs into this. And I talked about this yesterday too, that I don't really feel super confident taking a long on ETH just based on the simple fact that there's a low amount of volume compared to what it should be at this range. So I don't really love that. Generally speaking, though, when you see money flow index is low on the daily time frame, more specifically based on the recent 14 days, there's a good chance that we do see the price action kind of start to stall out here. Now, the last couple of hours here, let's actually double check this. Let's do a side by side here. This is the hourly time frame. So on the left-hand side, we have Bitcoin. Right-hand side, we've got Ethereum. And we can see they're both pretty much rallying back as expected. But you can actually see here that Ethereum didn't pull back quite as low as Bitcoin did. So there is a lot of strength in that $4,000, $4,100 range. So all that being said, propensity, that's kind of a green light there, so to speak, to let us know that we're much better off on a short-term time frame to take a long to that 4,300 versus trying to short to that 4,000 or lower range. Okay, now that this big sweep has already happened. Now, keep in mind, Bitcoin is rallying right now, so Ethereum looks pretty good on the smaller time frames, but it's also running very close to a 1-to-1 ratio with it. So you take that with a grain of salt, take it however you will. But the concept here is that the lower time frames still remain mildly bullish, and the macro timeframes are mildly bearish. So I really don't like to trade into that kind of weakness at this point. So nothing super amazing here to me for Ethereum. What are your thoughts? Why don't you let us know? If you're looking for a new exchange or possibly just want to help support the channel, Bitunix has got you covered. We've been partnered with this exchange for over 2 years. It's been our fan favorite for our community, and the reason why is because they take really good care of you. They offer trading reward bonuses as well as a reduction in fees. Best exchange I would recommend at this point. Link down below for more information. All right, folks, let's take a quick look here at Solana, see where we're at. We've got some key levels we want to kind of pay attention to. We can see a rejection at our point of control there at the 203 to 205 range. Well, it came a little bit above that to 209 and some change. We can see that resistance, just like 116,000 for Bitcoin, held pretty well. But the good news is lower timeframes tells us that we've matched and bottomed out at our local high, which is a very, very good sign. That shows low timeframe strength, and those are things I like to kind of consider taking trades into. So not proposing you just take a long right now, but now that we're over that 205 level, or that 200 range rather, that more psychological support, there's a good chance that we do continue a bit higher. But let's double check that and make sure to do our due diligence. Looking at the last 7 days, we want to kind of understand where we're at for open interest. Open interest is heavier below the price than above. Very, very good sign. We like to see that, and it's all local too. So that 198 to 200 range is a heavy amount there, which is good. And if we look at our liquidation delta, we can see we're shifting bullish, but not kind of wavering in both bullish and bearish. So not always the greatest sign here, but it does tell us that we're at this indecision moment, and with us establishing higher highs and higher lows, the propensity for for bulls to take control is higher. In other words, we have a slightly more amount of bulls in the market than the bears, but more importantly, this trend is, the trend is your friend, right? So that kind of confirms the trend is higher and moving forward in a positive, more higher high, higher low pattern. If we look at the last 7 days of liquidation, we can see once more 210 and then a pretty big chunk at 190 below the price. So unfortunately, with the price not pulling back that hard, we do have liquidation accumulating to the downside. So if we do end up seeing a pullback, Solana could rip to that 190 mark. Okay, so just be mindful that is a case. But at this point here, let's double check the daily time frame, see where we're at. So daily time frame here for Solana, we want to go ahead and see where our point of control is. It's at 203, pretty much right where the price is at within the last, ever since July. So if we look at the July time frame, we can see from July till now, 203, 204 is that heavy concentration. So closing above that level yesterday shows a lot of strength, and today reinforcing that would be a closure above that level too. So we want a closure of 200 to 203 or higher today to give us that confidence to let us know that we're in good shape. Under the impression that Solana doesn't inversely pair with Bitcoin, we should be in good shape to see continuation. Now, keep in mind though, the daily time frame, like most coins, isn't looking super bullish. Right? We're seeing a lot of divergences in macro timeframes. But the 4-hour time frame, if we continue to remain moderately bullish on these lower time frames, then there's a greater chance that we continue a bit further up. Now take a look here at the 50 on the RSI. We're kind of hanging out right in that range, which is good. Money flow index is high, generally a favorable sign, and we can see a second stochastic swing to the downside with MACD still converging. So while there's some conflicting information, I personally like this pattern here that we're seeing from Solana versus Bitcoin. So if you look at Bitcoin, how much, basically it went up by what? Went up by a total of 5.5%. And then it pulled back here to give you some perspective, about 5% as well. So pretty close to a 1-to-1 ratio for up to down. If we look at that with Solana, we can see this continuation higher is about 21%, and the pullback itself was 9%. So that is basically a 2x pairing to Bitcoin to the upside, or basically a 0.5% pairing to the downside. Basically, it's not moving down quite as fast as Bitcoin is. And that generally implies strength. That in combination with us consolidating at our point of control here locally up or above that rather, the 195 and then the macro point of control at 203, if we can maintain the 200 plus range for for Solana, and Bitcoin doesn't take a nosedive, I think Solana will continue to progress higher. So it's a very good combination here on lower timeframes. All right, so good stuff there. Solana has my vote for a long versus a short. Once more on the smaller timeframes. All right, folks, let's take a quick look here at SUI and double check a few important factors. Now, when we took our long with SUI yesterday, I just want to kind of reiterate and reaffirm a few things. We hit the good, 31% in 3 hours. And the reason why we took that trade, just so you know, I always explain my trades, is that the liquidation delta was approaching break even. We saw that shift in momentum. We also had a lot of liquidation above the price, which implies that a continuation higher is likely, especially with Bitcoin doing well. We had a good little 2x of Bitcoin to the upside. There's just a lot of reasons why SUI was going to run. Okay. Now I also highlighted too that $3 is that psychological resistance. So we're going to talk about that and look at that here. And what do you know? The price wicked up to a perfect 301. Look at that. That's exactly right. So psychological resistances at key level round numbers are important to remember. So try to always be mindful of that. Solana at 200, for example, 4,000 for Ethereum, 110, 100 for Bitcoin, the list goes on. That's kind of just how those round numbers work. So taking a look here at the backend data for SUI, let's go ahead and double check this. And we're going to look at the last 7 days, kind of keep the baseline the same here today and understand kind of, where are these areas at? Now there's going to be some weirdly funky open interest price action here on the heat map because the price gap down so quickly that there's missing data. But no matter how you look at it here, we have more local open interest in the 260s to 280s that reinforces support. Now there is more liquidation to the downside than the upside here based on the short liquidation delta being at about 300 million. So it's not a good sign in the general sense there, but once more, short squeezes can happen when you see that. So the concept here is that, when you consider taking a trade, always make sure you're working within tighter margins. Trying to hold SUI to like $5 or $6 right now for a long with high leverage is just a stupid thing. Okay, I'm just going to call it how it is because people seem to think that that's how trading works. I'm just going to buy today with a high leverage trade. If I get in a good entry, I'm good, right? Well, no, because the price will come back down and wick you out in general, most cases. Even if it doesn't, you're going to be eaten up on fees. People are just totally ignorant to the fact that they're getting chewed up on fees. So please make sure that you hold positions for shorter periods of time. High leverage, long holds doesn't make a lot of sense. Even on low leverage, you're still going to be eaten up over the time frames, right? So anyways, what I'm getting at here is there's still a lot more liquidation on the upside than the downside. So I still feel we have higher propensity for further upside for this coin. Now, are we going to just blast straight through $3 on the first attempt? No, we already rejected out there. But we could very well see that happen next. The only problem here is that SUI pulled back pretty strong on the way down with Bitcoin. In fact, why don't we take a look here at that combination in C. So this is this hour time frame. And in fact, even though SUI did pull back pretty hard, it's still doing pretty well, right? Because we had a good 20% run here, approximately from our local low. And then our pullback here recently was about close to 10% if you round up a little. Okay, so it's very similar to Solana's price action. So the truth is, this coin actually didn't pull back quite as hard as it looked like, and we're actually double bottoming here, if you will, on the lower time frames. So it shows strength here at that level. Okay. Oh, you know what? It would help if I picked the right chart. Sorry, let's start over here. Take a look here. Let's try that one more time. Double check this here. We can come up 23% increase rather, and if we pull back here, we can see about a 12%. While that's not exactly in line with Solana, not quite as paired as good, it's still better than Bitcoin, and we'll take it. Right, so it kind of implies strength in this coin, at least for the most part. Maybe a 75% correction versus Bitcoin, and a good little almost 2x the Bitcoin to the upside. So those are coins you generally want to try to invest in. Now, at this point, is it considered a high risk if you take a trade? Yes, it was a high risk trade when we took that yesterday. It's just that we saw this consolidation here above the local high, and that gave me pause to consider a long because we are holding above that resistance level. Okay, or more so, previous resistance turn support. Now, when we start to waver above and below, this can be choppy price action. It can be difficult to want to consider a trade. So those are just my thoughts there in that regard. Let's double check the daily time frame and just see if there's anything else that's kind of telling on the macro structure. I mean, we've identified yesterday that we were pretty well overextended and the relief rally makes sense, but we can also identify this too, and this is important to recognize. We have our ascending trend here, basically establishing higher lows, right? Once we broke through that threshold, we saw a bearish backtest here. So generally speaking, a bearish backtest of $3 could imply we pull back moving forward. Now that's going to require Bitcoin to pull back too. Okay, so keep in mind we have a bad FOMC meeting. Sorry, not a FOMC, but Jerome Powell today speaks, gives us some really bad news, and he's just kind of floundering around, and the price pulls back. You can expect SUI to pull back pretty hard, just at least until we close above that $3 mark. Right? I don't trust SUI under $3. And once again, the only reason why we took that trade was a tight margin. It was designed to be held for a short period of time. Right? And that's the concept there. So that's kind of where we're at there for SUI. It's not phenomenal. And generally speaking, when you do see bullish and bearish convergences combined on larger, smaller time frames, and you're kind of scratching your head, should I take a trade? That means you don't take the trade. Okay, simple as that. You should always feel great about taking a trade. You should never feel like you have any doubt. All right, so that's kind of the concept there. Trade carefully if you do end up taking a trade of this coin. I may consider a long if we break through that threshold of $3. Preferably, I want to be above 310, the local low. Okay, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Comment below. All right, folks, let's take a quick look here at XRP and double check a few important factors. Now, when we look at XRP, we want to recognize macro structure. Depending on how far out you zoom, you're going to be looking at about 240 as that support here for volume, 240, 245 right in that range. So we're kind of hanging out above that level. So definitely still bullish in the overall sense. XRP is honestly looking quite decent in the overall support range. Keep in mind, though, we got way too much resistance above the price. We had multiple reattempts of this 275 level. So if you consider a long, ensure you secure profits between now and then. Okay, that's the concept. So all that being said, let's double check some backend data and kind of see, now that we kind of generally understand the foundation of the macro structure, let's look at the last 7 days and kind of see where we're at. And when we look at the last 7 days, if I recall correctly from yesterday, 260, yep, was that area of open interest there. That's more so the local area. And then once more, 275. So we got some resistance above us. While that can work more so as a pulling mechanism, the price action can gravitate towards that. The odds of the price action for XRP going to $3 or higher right now is extremely low. Okay. 275 is probably a best case scenario on this potential run, and we're going to need to reevaluate if we get closer to that level. Between now and then, I've kind of mentioned with my trade alert for our community, the long that we took yesterday, we're averaging at about 255. May consider closing at break even, but also there's a decent chance we may recover too, and let's double check that as well and see, because XRP, it does have some strength here, and it's honoring its ascending trend. And we want to respect that for the moment. Liquidation delta has shifted bearish, so we do understand that too, that there's more people trying to short this coin than take longs with it, and that's generally unfavorable. That doesn't work in your advantage in most cases. So if we have bad news today, or Jerome Powell's kind of once again not speaking well to the market, right? And we're going to see that pull back. There is a lot more liquidation above the price than below the price, so I think shorts should probably be more concerned than those with longs. But on the same accord, the bottom kind of dropped out here. Let's actually double check this and look. On the far right-hand side, we got XRP. Let's go ahead and zoom in. This is once more the hourly time frame. So if we look at the left-hand side here, we can see Bitcoin once more had about a 5% run with a 5% correction, almost a 1-to-1 ratio. XRP bottom to top about 15% here recently, and then its correction to the downside, just based on yesterday, was about 10%. So that's fairly weak if you ask me. So XRP is not showing a lot of strength versus Bitcoin. While this isn't the only gauge, it's a good indication of how well or poorly the coin is doing. And the truth is, this local support at about 250 should have held, and it didn't. Okay, and since it didn't there, the local high, that lets us believe that we're probably more likely to see either further downside, especially if Bitcoin pulls back, or it's going to take longer for XRP to continue to progress higher if Bitcoin continues upwards, right? So those are things that are important to recognize. Daily time frame is going to be still the same scenario for XRP as we've seen with other coins. So we really don't need to look at that. Just to be mindful though, 270, 275, heavy resistance above the price. You got to be aware of that. Other than that, the 4-hour time frame is telling us we're trying to break bullish, but not even close. We can also recognize money flow index is moderately high based on the fact that we're no longer including this descending trend, and the MACD is trying to diverge but hasn't yet. So it's a mixed bag of trash in my opinion. So generally speaking, you don't trade trash. So once more, the concept remains the same. This coin is honoring its ascending trend. It's establishing higher lows, and that's a positive sign. So it does give us a slightly larger favorability of further upside, but there may also be a retest of this local bottom here first before that happens. Once more, I don't like to trade these kind of conditions, so be very careful. If you are in the XRP long, consider closing at break even, that 255 level, or even now if you want, just to be on the safe side, because we truly don't know what's going to happen with our fundamental catalyst today. But we can see and identify that XRP it's aligning itself with Bitcoin as the days progress, and generally that's not a great sign for breakout. It's more likely to break down with Bitcoin if it pulls back. So those are my thoughts. What are yours? Why don't you comment below? Love to hear it. We'll look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's video. Have a great rest of your day. Be safe out there.